Kids these days have it so easy with their iPhones and event Pokemon distributed via the internet. Back in my day you had to go to a physical theme park to stand in line for hours on end, only to hear they were out of Deoxys by the time it was your turn. And yes, this is based on true events, don't get me started. Anyway, Pokemon have been given away as events for as long as the series has existed at this point. So I figured I'd dive into every generation and look for the best distribution in each. Keep in mind though, with best, I mean in a sense of how cool it is to get, not like best from a competitive standpoint or whatever. And in order to have a fair playing field, Pokemon that came with an entire in-game area or event don't count. So no half Origin Arceus, Faraway Island Mew or Pecharunt. With that said, let's get started with Gen 1, which yes, did have event distributions. You would need to send in your cartridge or visit a physical event, but it was possible to receive event Pokemon on red, blue, green or yellow. That said, especially in the West there was not a lot of variety in what you could get. All events but one gave you a Mew, which was special of course, but could also be obtained via the infamous glitch. The sole exception was a Surfing Pikachu, handed out by Nintendo Power, which was also rare, but similarly could be obtained yourself using Pokemon Stadium. And so we need to look at Japan for some truly unique event Pokemon, because as has been consistently true throughout the entire history of the series, Japan gets more event Pokemon than any other region. Although they too went hard on distributing Mew, and similarly had a Surfing and even Flying Pikachu event, there were 3 additional Pokemon handed out, 2 of which I would consider the joint winners of Gen 1. These are a Fearow and a Rapidash, both capable of the move Payday, which is usually exclusive to the Meowth line. And here's a good question for those looking to test their Pokemon knowledge. Do you know why Fearow and Rapidash were distributed together? Take a second to think. And the answer is because they are the favorite Pokemon of the chairman of the Pokemon fan club in Cerulean City. I just think this is such a cool little random reference that I want to reward it with the title of Best Event of Gen 1, even if a Mew is probably more valuable. On to Generation 2, at which point the Pokemon craze had truly gone worldwide, and that is reflected in the events as well. While most still gave away Celebi, the brand new mythical at the time, the true name of the game this generation was Random Events. Essentially, every event that didn't involve Celebi now involved a sort of lottery mechanic, where you couldn't know what you were going to get. In Japan, this was done via eggs, as you wouldn't receive a Pokemon but an egg instead that could hatch a variety of different mons, ranging from starters if you were lucky, baby Pokemon in most cases, or Pokemon like Hoothoot or Phanpy if you were unlucky. The West, or rather New York, went one step further because found in the Pokemon Center in New York was a machine that would randomly distribute one of the event Pokemon going on that week, with the obtainable mons switching every week. While it was impossible to get a truly useless phase, like was possible with the Japanese eggs, the gap in quality here was staggering. If you were unlucky, you might find yourself with a Seal or a Murkrow, with an exclusive move like Flail or Nightshade. If you were lucky though, you'd be getting shiny legendaries or starters. That's a huge gap in quality right there. Probably, in hindsight, the best week to have visited the Pokemon Center in New York was November 15 to 21, 2002, when all 5 legendary Pokemon of the then new Johto were available in their shiny form. Sure, if you were less fortunate, you ended up with an Elekid or Pursuit, but I would still consider this week the best event of Gen 2, all those guaranteed Celebi notwithstanding. Next is Generation 3, where the theme park giving away Deoxys is definitely not winning my vote. Especially because we have a ton of options here, as the number of events worldwide absolutely exploded in this gen. Many were for mythicals of course, some were regular Pokemon holding special items, but what is interesting is that shiny events died out nearly entirely. All except for one, that is, and that is another event with a good story attached. So, as you may have heard, early versions of Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire suffered from something called the Berry Glitch, which effectively causes every time-related event to stop working. This would nowadays easily be fixed with a patch, but the GBA didn't have internet capabilities, and so patches could only be applied physically. The Pokemon Company did offer this opportunity for players worldwide, and in order to stimulate players to stop by, these events would also give away a shiny Zigzagoon, the only widely distributed shiny Pokemon of this generation. It also held a lychee berry, which is nowadays pretty common, but at the time was extremely elusive, only obtainable on Mirage Island or via events like this one. So to some extent, this berry glitch apology was essentially 2 events in one, and as such, a clear winner for Gen 3. Where Gen 3 truly started the boom of Pokemon events, Gen 4 is probably the generation best known for its events. The Shaymin, Darkrai and Arceus events are probably the series' most famous ones, but don't forget the Sinjoh ruins and the special Pichu of Heart Gold and Soul Silver, as well as the shiny legendary beasts that triggered an event in Generation 5, despite being Gen 4 events themselves. But remember the rules, cool as these all are, they do not count. So instead we have to pick from the many other distributions, and while technically the best events are probably either the mythicals and legendaries given away for their movies, or the shiny Eevee and Milotic handed out to competitors of the Pokemon World Championship, my vote goes to an event where the Pokemon received is nothing special, but the circumstances make it very rare regardless. What you receive is a quite simple Chimchar with a solid moveset, a high level and holding a helpful but not unique Lucky Egg. It does have a special ribbon though to commemorate how rare it really is. Because this Chimchar could only be obtained at the Pokemon Center in Nagoya, Japan, only between September 12th and November 3rd of 2010, and only if you could prove your birthday was less than 3 days away at your time of visiting. Even if you lived right next door from this venue, you basically had to be born in either October of one of the few weeks around it, or you'd be flat out of luck. Now, from a technical standpoint, that makes this a nearly useless event distribution, but at the same time, it also makes those lucky few who were able to get their hands on this Chimchar the new trainers of one of the rarest Pokemon ever, and that is simply very cool. We continue with Gen 5, which continued what Gen 4 had set in motion, although more and more of the events would start to get distributed via Wi-Fi instead of local events. A new addition this gen were a ton of Pokemon inspired by characters from the series. You've got Cynthia's Spiritomb, Steven's Metagross, Blue's Pidgeot, Alder's Volcarona, and much more, including some based on the anime like Ash's Pikachu, Silent's Pansage, and Iris's Axew. While these are definitely very cool, I do feel they must lose out to even better shiny events. One really cool one was Japan exclusive, and that you obtain an egg that would always contain a shiny dragon type, to celebrate the Year of the Dragon. And while I do like that there's a random element to it without leaving anyone really unlucky, the winner for this gen combines these two types of events together and also contains a lovely reference as a cherry on top. Presenting Nobunaga's Rayquaza, a shiny Rayquaza based on the one Nobunaga owns in Pokemon Conquest, the most underrated Pokemon spin-off ever. It could only be obtained between March and April 2012 via Wi-Fi, but it was at least distributed worldwide. It didn't have any special moves or other unique features, but it doesn't need it. Shiny Rayquaza is elusive enough as is, and its original trainer being a character from Pokemon Conquest makes it easily cool enough to be crowned the winner of this generation. Going into Generation 6, another type of event for us to consider was added, as we now have the local physical events, the Wi-Fi based events, which were now Nintendo Network events due to transitioning to the 3DS, and a new addition, the serial codes, which essentially took over a lot of what local events used to be, especially worldwide. But yeah, Gen 6 has a ridiculously high amount of events, although most fall into a few categories. Pokemon based on those used by characters remained and were expanded. We still saw plenty of Pokemon given away as promo for movies or anime events, and we would now also receive Pokemon based on those used by winners in the competitive scene, which could be shiny if the winner used a shiny variant. And while these categories do give us a ton of cool options, at this point even those feel a tiny bit still. Still great, but there's only so many times you can be surprised by stuff like that. Gen 6 also had several quite prominent events that essentially altered many players their first playthrough of a game completely, like the Torchic holding a Blazikenite in X and Y, or the Shiny Beldum for Oras, which I guess are technically the best events of this generation, but I prefer to shine a light on the more unknown events. So I went looking for truly unique distributions and instead found myself drifting to the common Pokemon, that at first sight don't appear to be anything special, making you wonder why they were handed out at events to begin with. And in my opinion, the best one in that category is a simple, bang average Psyduck. The only thing noteworthy about it is the original trainer. Junichi Masuda, Pokemon veteran and long-time high-ranked employee of Game Freak. He did a series of signings around Japan, and anyone that stopped by could receive a Psyduck, which is Masuda's favorite Pokemon. I just think there's something neat about him not handing some epic legendary or shiny out to draw folks in, but instead just gives out his favorite Pokemon. And yeah, technically the Mega Torchic is probably the best event of this gen, but this Psyduck is the winner in my heart. Starting with Generation 7, events were beginning to shrink in numbers. There was still a great number of them, don't get me wrong, but the number is lower than Gen 6 and 5. That said, we can keep things very short here, because there is one event which just ticks all boxes. The Cap Pikachu, Ash's little rodent with hats matching his from the various anime arcs. It's a great reference, especially since they went up and beyond and included even the hats from like Gen 3 and 4, which they really didn't need to do in order to make this worthwhile. This event was also very well distributed worldwide, so from that perspective it's among the best run ones as well. I mean, I owned Cat Pikachu, and I didn't have to stand in a theme park for hours for it. What's also great is that despite this being a very unique Pokemon with its own model and essentially being a new form of Pikachu, it was actually supported going forward as well, as you can also move it to Gen 8. Furthermore, Cat Pikachu also showed up in a ton of spin-off titles as well and the TCG, making this truly one big Pokemon celebration. And I believe you could very well make the argument that this is the best event Pokemon has ever seen. And while the Cat Pikachu event returned for Gen 8, we're of course going to pick something else for a generation which relied a lot on online events due to a certain something shutting public places for a good amount of time during this gen's lifespan. Whether this played a part in the enormous decrease of events, or whether that was always planned, we cannot know. But the fact of the matter is that there was a huge decrease in events between Gen 7 and 8. We still got a couple of mythicals, with the new Zarude being most eye-catching, and a ton of tournament winners, but the real interesting stuff was nowhere to be found anymore. And so, I would consider the best event to be the distribution of the Shiny Zacian and Zamazenta in 2022. This was originally going to be a physical serial code event, but a little something something changed that into an online one, which meant I, and I'm sure plenty of others as well, were able to grab it when you otherwise might not have. While the Pokemon themselves are little more than a cool thing to have, it is noteworthy that their original trainers are named Arthur and Lancer, which are references to King Arthur and Sir Lancelot from Arthurian legends, and really have nothing to do with Pokemon or the lore of Sword and Shield. And finally, we get to Gen 9, which is currently still ongoing, so the best event might be yet to come. For example, you would expect a shiny Koraidon and Miraidon to be given away somewhere down the line, which would then probably be the best, but that currently hasn't happened or even been announced yet. When looking at what has been given out, the selection is honestly quite bare bones, both in terms of what you actually get as well as the circumstances of the events. While the Mew event to accompany the Mewtwo raids was quite cool, this distribution had an in-game effect, an event tied to it, meaning it isn't eligible. So instead, my vote for the best event goes to the shiny Lucario that was promotion for the release of the Indigo disc, which also came with a Master Ball. While this is cool of course, I think it's probably the least exciting event in this entire video. Shiny Pokemon have lost some value over the years as is. I feel like that's not a super controversial opinion. So a widely available shiny Pokemon that I didn't even have to work for is not super exciting anymore, I would argue. But yeah, keeping in mind that the rest of the events of Gen 9 have been even worse, I really hope Game Freak has something better left in the tank as this generation begins to come to an end. And that has been all of them. What do you consider the best event distributions in Pokemon history? Share them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel to stay updated on all my future Pokemon content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.